My name is Leo, a 5-year-old financial advisor living in Boston. When my grandfather passed away last month, I knew the substantial inheritance he promised me would change my life. What I never expected was being called to a family meeting where my parents would casually announce their plans for my inheritance money. My younger brother Ryan sat there smirking as they spoke. Little did they know, I was 3 steps ahead of their scheme. I just nodded and let them talk themselves into a corner. If you enjoy stories about family betrayal and sweet justice, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what happened next changed everything. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in Lexington, Massachusetts, where most families worked hard to maintain their middle-class lifestyle. My father Robert worked as an accountant at a local firm, while my mother Martha taught English at the nearby high school. We never struggled financially, but we were far from wealthy. That is, except for my maternal grandfather, Harold Thompson. Grandpa Harold built his construction supply company from nothing after returning from Vietnam. He started with a single truck and a small warehouse, eventually growing it into a regional powerhouse with locations across New England. What made him special wasn't just his business acumen, but his willingness to share his knowledge. From the time I was 10 years old, Grandpa Harold would invite me to his home office every Saturday morning. While other kids watched cartoons, I sat in his leather chair learning about profit margins, investment strategies, and the value of compound interest. He would pull out stock reports, company financials, and real estate listings, teaching me to spot opportunities where others saw only numbers. "Leo," he would say, his voice gravelly from years of smoking pipes on job sites, "money is just a tool. What matters is what you build with it." Those mornings shaped my entire life trajectory. By 13, I was investing my paper route money in stocks Grandpa helped me research. At 16, I managed my own portfolio that outperformed most adult investors. This special bond made me the natural inheritor of not just his wealth but his legacy. When I pass on, he told me on my college graduation day, "Everything I built will be yours to grow. Not to squander, but to build upon." My younger brother Ryan never showed interest in these lessons. 4 years younger than me, Ryan was always the family charmer. Where I was analytical and careful, Ryan was spontaneous and charismatic. Our parents adored his natural social skills and athletic prowess, often attending his football games while missing my academic competitions. This pattern continued into adulthood. I worked my way through Boston College's finance program, taking out minimal student loans and working part-time jobs. After graduation, I secured an entry-level position at a respected financial advisory firm, slowly building my client list and reputation through diligence and results. Ryan, meanwhile, attended 3 different colleges before finally getting a marketing degree from a school known more for its parties than academics. Our parents paid his full tuition, housing, and even gave him spending money despite his mediocre grades and frequent disciplinary issues. His post-college life followed a predictable pattern. He would announce a new business venture with grand promises, convince our parents to invest, work enthusiastically for a few months, then watch it collapse due to poor planning or mismanagement. First came a sports apparel store that closed within a year, then a food truck that he abandoned after 6 months. Later, an app development company where he was somehow both CEO and the only employee. After each failure, Ryan would return home to live with our parents while plotting his next sure thing. They always welcomed him with open arms and open checkbooks, explaining away his failures as bad timing or unfair market conditions. Never poor judgment or lack of discipline. My relationship with my parents grew increasingly strained during my late 20s. Every family dinner became a showcase for Ryan's newest venture, with minimal interest in my steady career advancement. When I was promoted to senior advisor managing over $80 million in client assets, my mother simply said, "That's nice, dear," before turning to Ryan to ask about his latest scheme selling customized cryptocurrency. Grandpa Harold noticed this imbalance. During our private conversations, he expressed concern about how my parents enabled Ryan's irresponsibility. "Your brother needs to fail on his own terms," he told me during one of our fishing trips. Real growth comes from facing consequences, not being shielded from them. The family dynamics took a darker turn 3 years ago when Grandpa Harold was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 18 months at best. As his health declined, I visited him 3 or 4 times weekly, helping manage his medications, taking him to appointments, and simply sitting with him, listening to his stories and advice. Ryan barely visited, always claiming to be swamped with his latest venture. My parents made excuses for him, saying he processed grief differently or was too sensitive to see Grandpa in a weakened state. Yet when Grandpa Harold mentioned updating his will, Ryan suddenly found time for weekly visits, bringing expensive scotch. Grandpa could no longer drink, and cigars he could no longer smoke. My grandfather saw through this transparent shift. During one of our private moments when I was helping him back to bed after a difficult day of treatment, he squeezed my hand and whispered, "Remember, Leo, protect what you build. Not everyone who shares your blood shares your values." At the time, I thought he was speaking generally about business. Later, I realized he was warning me about something much closer to home. In his final months, Grandpa Harold spoke more deliberately about his legacy. He had amassed considerable wealth beyond the business itself. His investment portfolio, real estate holdings, and cash savings totaled well over $4 million, plus the business valuation of around $11 million. He made it clear that while the business would be distributed among key employees who had helped build it, the majority of his personal wealth would come to me. "You understand money, Leo," he said. "You respect it without worshiping it." The last time I saw him conscious, 2 days before he passed, he motioned for me to come closer to his hospital bed. "The papers are with Sullivan," he whispered, referring to his longtime attorney. "Trust no one else." Those were the last meaningful words he spoke to me. He died peacefully in his sleep 48 hours later, leaving behind a legacy far greater than just financial assets. The first warning signs appeared during Grandpa Harold's funeral reception. As family and friends gathered at my parents' home after the service, I noticed my mother and Ryan having an intense whispered conversation in the kitchen. When I approached, they abruptly changed the subject, my mother suddenly very interested in rearranging the sandwich platter. Later that evening, after most guests had left, I overheard my father on the phone in his study. "Yes, we understand the timeline," he said in hushed tones. "Once the assets are released, we can move forward with the payment plan we discussed." When he noticed me in the doorway, he quickly ended the call and claimed he was speaking to the funeral home about final expenses. His explanation seemed plausible, but something about his nervous smile felt off. The next red flag came when Sullivan, my grandfather's attorney, approached me at the reception. A tall man with silver hair and perpetually serious expression, he had handled my grandfather's legal matters for over 30 years. "Leo, we need to discuss your grandfather's arrangements," he said quietly. "But not here. Come to my office next week, Tuesday, 2 p.m. Before I could ask questions, my mother appeared, looping her arm through Sullivan's and steering him toward another group of mourners. "Jim, you simply must talk to Robert's brother about that property matter," she insisted, effectively ending our conversation. Throughout the following week, strange patterns emerged. My parents delayed discussions about the will reading, claiming we should take time to grieve properly before dealing with financial matters. Ryan, who had been driving a 10-year-old Honda with a missing bumper, suddenly appeared in a brand-new Audi. When I asked how he could afford it, he vaguely mentioned a business loan coming through. Most concerning was my father repeatedly bringing up Ryan's temporary financial situation in our conversations. "Your brother has had some tough breaks," he said during a phone call ostensibly about memorial arrangements, "but he's about to turn things around with this new venture. He just needs a bit of capital to get over this rough patch." By the time Tuesday arrived, my suspicions were fully activated. I arrived at Sullivan's downtown office precisely at 2 p.m., expecting a straightforward discussion about inheritance details. What I got instead was a warning. Sullivan looked older than he had at the funeral, his face drawn with what I now recognize as ethical distress. "Leo, I want to be clear that I represent your grandfather's estate, not any individual beneficiary," he began formally. But Harold was not just my client. He was my friend for 30 years. He slid a folder across his desk. These are copies of the official will documents that will be presented at the reading next week. Review them carefully. Compare them with this. He then pulled a second, thinner folder from his desk drawer. Harold left this with me 6 months ago with instructions to give it to you privately. The second folder contained a letter from my grandfather, along with a detailed list of his assets and his intended distribution. The numbers matched the official will, but there was an additional note explaining that he had created a separate legal mechanism for transferring the bulk of his wealth. The trust is already established, Sullivan explained, but it requires your signature to activate. Harold wanted to ensure no one could pressure you or manipulate the distribution. When I asked why such precautions were necessary, Sullivan chose his words carefully. Your grandfather was concerned about certain influences. He wanted his wishes honored, exactly as he intended. Before leaving, Sullivan handed me a business card. This is Thomas Beckert, a forensic accountant who has worked with me on sensitive cases. Call him. Today, that afternoon, I contacted Beckert and shared my concerns. His response was immediate and unsettling. I can start looking into financial movements around your family today, he said. But based on what you're describing, I recommend also hiring a private investigator to monitor the broader situation. Through Beckert's recommendation, I engaged Samuel Wilson, a former FBI agent turned private investigator specializing in financial crimes. Within 3 days, both men had uncovered disturbing information. Beckert discovered Ryan had accumulated gambling debts exceeding $375,000 across multiple casinos in Connecticut and online betting platforms. He had also taken out high-interest loans from questionable lenders, using potential inheritance as verbal collateral. My parents had been covering minimum payments on these debts for months, including taking out a second mortgage on their home. Wilson's investigation revealed even more troubling developments. He obtained photos of Ryan meeting with loan sharks in casino parking lots. He recorded conversations in which Ryan promised payment as soon as the old man's money clears. Most disturbingly, he discovered my parents had been in contact with a different attorney about contesting aspects of the will if it didn't meet their expectations. The most damning evidence came when Wilson managed to photograph documents on my father's home office desk during a service call he arranged by posing as an internet technician. The papers outlined a plan to use nearly all of my inheritance to clear Ryan's debts, with justifications about why this was fair given my financial success compared to my brother's struggles. Armed with this information, I requested a private meeting with Grandpa Harold's personal banker at First Boston Trust. Initially hesitant to share details, Marion Winters became more forthcoming when I presented a letter from Sullivan confirming my role in the estate. Your grandfather was concerned about unusual withdrawal attempts in his final months, she explained. He implemented additional security protocols requiring in-person verification for any transaction over $10,000. She showed me records of 3 attempted wire transfers that had been blocked, all requested by my father, claiming to be acting on my grandfather's behalf, all directed toward entities that Beckert later identified as connected to Ryan's creditors. The picture becoming clearer, I scheduled a meeting with Sullivan to discuss legal options. His office, normally meticulously organized, was covered with estate documents and legal references when I arrived. I've been researching precedents, he explained. Your grandfather's fears appear well-founded. Together, we reviewed the trust documents Grandpa Harold had prepared. The irrevocable trust would place the bulk of his assets under the control of a trustee, me, with specific conditions for distribution and investment. Once activated, the assets would be legally protected from claims by anyone other than the designated beneficiaries, following the specific terms established by the grantor. Harold recorded a video statement outlining his wishes, Sullivan added, playing a file on his computer. There was Grandpa Harold, visibly ill but mentally sharp, detailing exactly how his estate should be handled, and explicitly stating that while he loved his daughter and her family, He had concerns about certain patterns of financial irresponsibility that he didn't want his legacy to enable. By the end of the week, I had a complete picture of what was happening. My brother had gambled himself into financial ruin. My parents had exhausted their own resources trying to bail him out. Now they planned to divert my inheritance to solve Ryan's problems, justifying it as family helping family, while disregarding my grandfather's explicit wishes. The evidence was overwhelming, but the emotional impact hit me in waves. I remembered all those Saturday mornings learning from Grandpa. I thought about the trust he placed in me, not just with his money, but with his values and vision. And I felt the profound betrayal of knowing my own parents and brother saw me not as family to be respected, but as a solution to problems they created. That night, sitting alone in my apartment surrounded by investigation reports and legal documents, I made my decision. I would not be their bailout plan. I would honor Grandpa Harold's wishes exactly as he intended, and I would ensure they never had the opportunity to disregard his legacy or manipulate me again. The path forward was clear, but executing it would require precision, timing, and unwavering resolve. Family manipulation is powerful, and I knew they would pull every emotional lever possible once they realized their plan was in jeopardy. The next morning, I met with Sullivan and officially activated the trust my grandfather had established. The paperwork was substantial, requiring nearly 3 hours to complete, but by noon, the transfer of assets was legally initiated. Within 72 hours, approximately $4.7 million in liquid assets and investments would be secured in the trust, beyond the reach of anyone looking to divert them. Your grandfather built in a special provision, Sullivan noted, as we finalized the documents. Any attempt to contest the trust or exert undue influence automatically triggers a reduction in potential distributions to the contesting parties. In simple terms, if my parents or Ryan tried to fight this legally, they would lose access to even the smaller bequests Grandpa Harold had left them directly. With the trust activation and process, I turned my attention to the business aspect of the inheritance. While the company itself would remain operational under the leadership team my grandfather had selected, his controlling interest would pass to me. This represented not just financial value, but a legacy of relationships and responsibilities to employees who had been loyal to my grandfather for decades. I arranged a private meeting with Marcus Jennings, the longtime operations director who would become CEO under the succession plan. A robust man with calloused hands that revealed his own journey from construction sites to the executive suite, Marcus had worked alongside my grandfather for over 20 years. "Harold talked about you constantly," Marcus said when we met at the company headquarters. "Said you had the mind for growth, but also the heart to remember this business is about people, not just profits." We spent hours reviewing the company's status, future contracts, and employee situations. Marcus shared concerns about rumors circulating that the business might be sold after my grandfather's death. "Some of the team is nervous," he admitted. "There's talk your brother has been approaching potential buyers, suggesting he'll have authority to negotiate once the estate clears." This information, while alarming, wasn't surprising given what the investigation had uncovered. I assured Marcus that no sale was planned and authorized him to communicate this to the team. "The company stays intact. Following my grandfather's succession plan," I stated firmly. "I'll be an active board member, but trust the operational leadership to continue the legacy properly." The relief on his face was evident. Before I left, Marcus handed me a sealed envelope. "Harold asked me to give you this, if anything seemed unusual after his passing." Inside was a handwritten letter detailing conversations where Ryan had approached my grandfather requesting large loans or business investments in the months before his death. Each was declined, based on Ryan's history of financial irresponsibility. The letter ended with a warning. "He will try the same with you. Remember what we discussed about predators versus producers." This additional confirmation strengthened my resolve. Back at my apartment, I compiled all evidence into organized files: financial records, investigator reports, documented attempts to access grandfather's accounts, and statements from trusted associates. I created both physical and digital copies, storing backups with Sullivan and in my own secure locations. That evening, the private investigator called with new information. "Your parents have scheduled a family dinner for this Sunday," Wilson reported. "They've called it an important family meeting about the future. Both your brother's financial advisor and their own attorney have been consulted today." This timeline matched what Sullivan had told me about the official will reading scheduled for Monday morning. It seemed my parents wanted to present their plan and secure my agreement before the official proceedings. "I've also confirmed your brother has made promises to at least 3 creditors about payments coming next week," Wilson added. One conversation specifically mentioned family money coming through. With the meeting scheduled, I had limited time to complete my preparations. I reached out to Dr. Sharon Lewis, a therapist specializing in family financial conflicts, whom Sullivan had recommended. "What you're describing is unfortunately common with family wealth transfers," she explained during our emergency session. "Your parents have created what we call an enmeshed financial relationship with your brother, where his problems become everyone's responsibility while your boundaries are disregarded." Dr. Lewis helped me prepare mentally for the emotional manipulation tactics likely to be deployed at the family meeting. We practiced responses to guilt trips, accusations of selfishness, and appeals to family loyalty. Most importantly, she reinforced that honoring my grandfather's wishes was not just legally appropriate but ethically sound. "Your grandfather created these protections for a reason," she noted. "Respecting his decisions is a form of respect for his life and values." By Saturday, the trust activation was complete. Sullivan confirmed that all designated assets were now legally secured and protected. The business transition was proceeding according to plan, with Marcus keeping me updated on operations. I had gathered comprehensive evidence, prepared psychologically for the confrontation, and secured the inheritance exactly as my grandfather intended. All that remained was to face my family and their scheme directly. I scheduled a meeting with Beckert and Wilson on Saturday afternoon for final preparation. "Based on the financial evidence, they're in a desperate position," Beckert explained, reviewing Ryan's debt documentation. "The timeline of these loans suggests they've been planning this maneuver since before your grandfather's condition worsened." Wilson provided additional context from his surveillance. "Your brother has made multiple visits to pawn shops this week, likely selling items to cover immediate expenses. He's telling creditors that a family solution has been arranged. Your parents have also contacted a real estate agent about potentially listing their home, presumably as a backup plan." The final piece came from Sullivan, who called as our meeting concluded. "I've been contacted by another attorney claiming to represent your family's interests in the estate matter," he said. "They've requested a delay in the official reading, citing family considerations that need resolution. Their strategy was becoming transparent. Secure my agreement at the Sunday dinner to use my inheritance for Ryan's debts, then formalize it before the official proceedings. They had no idea the assets were already secured or that I was fully aware of their intentions. That night, I reviewed everything one final time. The evidence was conclusive. The legal protections were in place. The emotional preparation was complete. Tomorrow, I would face my family not as the compliant son and brother they expected, but as the trustee and guardian of my grandfather's legacy, exactly as he had intended. As I organized the final documents to bring to the dinner, I found a photo of my grandfather and me from a fishing trip 10 years earlier. We were both smiling, holding a modest catch, the lake shimmering behind us. I remembered what he said that day about fishing and business alike. Patience and preparation beat desperation every time. Tomorrow would prove him right once again. Sunday morning arrived with an unexpected sense of calm. I had slept surprisingly well, perhaps because for the first time in weeks, I was acting rather than reacting. The trust was established, the assets secured, and my strategy set. Now it was simply a matter of execution. I began the day with preparation both practical and personal. First came a secure call with Sullivan to confirm the legal status of all arrangements. "Everything is properly executed," he assured me. "The trust is irrevocable and fully funded as of 6 p.m. yesterday. Your position as trustee gives you sole discretion over distributions within the parameters established by your grandfather. Next, I contacted Marion at First Boston Trust to verify the status of accounts. All transfers are complete and secured, she confirmed. Any attempts to access those funds would require your authorization as trustee, with multi-factor authentication and in-person verification. The business transition was equally secure. Marcus had implemented the succession plan immediately after our meeting, with key employees already operating in their new roles. The company's attorney had filed updated ownership documents, reflecting my grandfather's wishes, with copies sent to all major clients and vendors to prevent any confusion or opportunistic disruption. With the practical elements confirmed, I turned to personal preparation. I selected my attire carefully, a conservative navy suit my grandfather had given me when I earned my financial advisor certification. It was not just professional, but symbolic of the legacy I was protecting. Before leaving my apartment, I activated the recording devices Wilson had provided. While Massachusetts law required all parties to consent to audio recording, video recording in a public place, or with the consent of the property owner was permitted. Since the dinner was at my parents' home and they would obviously be present, the video recording through my phone and a secondary device would be legal, especially given the evidence of potential financial misconduct. I arrived at my parents' suburban home precisely at 5 p.m., intentionally early to observe preparations and positioning. The house where I grew up looked different, somehow affluent, but hollow. Recent renovations had transformed the modest colonial into something resembling a luxury real estate listing, with expensive landscaping and a newly paved circular driveway where Ryan's Audi was already parked. My mother answered the door with an overly enthusiastic greeting, her perfume overwhelming as she hugged me tightly. "Leo, you're early. We weren't expecting you for another 30 minutes. Her smile seemed fixed, her eyes evaluating me as she ushered me inside. The house had been thoroughly cleaned, with new furniture in the living room and what appeared to be recent artwork on the walls. I recognized the artificial environment setting for what it was, a staged backdrop for a predetermined narrative. "Your father and Ryan are in the study," she said, guiding me toward the kitchen instead. "They'll join us soon. Can I get you a drink? We bought that bourbon you like." The fact that she knew my preferred bourbon was telling. I couldn't remember the last time my preferences had factored into family gatherings. I accepted the drink, using the opportunity to place my phone on the kitchen counter at an angle that would capture the coming conversation. "So," I said casually, "what prompted this family meeting? Your message mentioned important decisions." Her hand trembled slightly as she poured the drinks. "Oh, just some family matters to discuss now that we're all adjusting to life without your grandfather. Nothing to worry about." The practiced casualness in her voice confirmed everything my investigation had revealed. This was not an impromptu family gathering, but a carefully orchestrated ambush. As we moved to the living room, my father and Ryan emerged from the study. My father looked older than at the funeral, stress evident in the new lines around his eyes. Ryan, by contrast, appeared unusually confident, his posture relaxed as he sipped from an already half-empty glass of scotch. "Leo," my father greeted with a firm handshake. "Good to see you. Thanks for making time for this." Ryan offered a smirk rather than a greeting, dropping into the leather armchair that had once been my grandfather's favorite seat when he visited. The symbolic claiming of that space wasn't lost on me. Dinner was a strange affair. My mother had prepared all my childhood favorites, a transparent attempt to evoke nostalgia and familial warmth. The conversation remained superficial, with careful avoidance of any mention of my grandfather or inheritance. Instead, they asked detailed questions about my work, clients, and financial success, questions they had never shown interest in before. I played along, sharing selected information about my practice while observing their reactions. Each mention of my professional success seemed to reassure them, reinforcing their narrative that I didn't need my inheritance due to my established career. As dessert was served, my father finally shifted the conversation toward the intended topic. "Leo, we've been thinking a lot about family lately," he began, his tone deliberately measured. about how we support each other through difficult times. My mother reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Family is everything, especially now that Dad is gone. Ryan remained silent, but his expression had shifted to something resembling anticipated victory. We've always been proud of how you've built your career, my father continued. Your success is truly impressive, especially compared to the challenges your brother has faced. I nodded, waiting for the trap to spring fully open. The thing is, my mother interjected, her voice taking on a rehearsed quality, not everyone has the same opportunities or abilities. Some people need more support, and there it was, the foundation of their justification. My success was being positioned as reason to redirect my inheritance to Ryan's failures. I continued nodding, allowing them to unfold their plan completely. Ryan has had some financial setbacks, my father stated, understating the situation dramatically. Some unfortunate business timing and investment issues. Ryan finally spoke, his voice attempting contrition, but landing closer to entitlement. I made some mistakes, bro. Got in over my head with some guys who aren't exactly understanding about payment schedules. My mother's eyes teared up on cue. He's in danger, Leo. These aren't people you can reason with. My father cleared his throat, moving to the core of their proposal. We've been looking at options, and we think the most sensible approach is to use a portion of the family inheritance to clear these obligations. A portion? I asked innocently. They exchanged glances before my father continued. Well, the majority of what's coming to you from Grandpa. Ryan needs a clean slate to rebuild. How much are we talking about? I pressed, knowing the answer but wanting it stated explicitly. Another uncomfortable silence before Ryan answered. About 4 million, give or take. Give or take, I repeated. And that's the majority of the inheritance because it's what I need. Ryan snapped, his facade of remorse instantly evaporating. These guys aren't messing around, Leo. They want their money. My mother jumped in, attempting to smooth over his outburst. What Ryan means is that this is a family emergency. We need to stand together. My father nodded solemnly. We've already spoken with some of his creditors, assured them that payment would be coming after the will reading tomorrow. They've agreed to settle the debts, if paid in full by the end of the week. The audacity was breathtaking. They had not only planned to repurpose my inheritance, but had already made commitments based on assets that weren't theirs to allocate. I see, I said calmly. And what does Grandpa Harold get in all this? His wishes and intentions just don't matter? My father's expression hardened. Your grandfather wouldn't want Ryan in danger. Family comes first. He would understand, my mother insisted. You're already successful. You don't need this money like Ryan does. The pattern was exactly as Dr. Lewis had predicted: emotional manipulation, selective interpretation of a dead man's wishes, and complete disregard for boundaries or fairness. So, to summarize, I said, maintaining a neutral tone, you want me to give up my entire inheritance, approximately $4 million, to pay off gambling debts that Ryan accumulated through his own choices? Ryan flinched at the direct naming of his gambling, while my parents exchanged alarmed glances. It's not just gambling, my father attempted. There were business investments. Gambling, I repeated firmly. Casino debts, sports betting, online poker. Let's not pretend. The room fell silent as they realized I knew more than they had assumed. My father recovered first, shifting to a more authoritative tone. Regardless of how the situation developed, this is what the family needs now. Your grandfather would expect you to help your brother. And if I don't agree? I asked, already knowing the answer. My mother's expression turned wounded. Leo, we're not asking. We're telling you what's happening. The papers are already drawn up for tomorrow. We've been patient with you, my father added, his tone now openly threatening. But this is happening with or without your blessing. The only question is whether you remain part of this family afterward. And there it was, the ultimatum, the final manipulation tactic. Comply or be cut off. I took a deep breath, thinking of my grandfather's warning about protecting what I had built. I'll need to think about this, I said, buying time rather than revealing my hand immediately. "There's nothing to think about," Ryan interjected, leaning forward aggressively. "This is happening. The money's being transferred after the reading tomorrow. The only choice you have is whether you do it willingly or make us force it." My mother shot him a warning glance, clearly preferring the pretense of my having a choice, but the truth was now explicitly stated. They had made decisions about my inheritance without my input or consent, with complete disregard for my grandfather's wishes. As I looked at their faces, the entitlement, the manipulation, the absolute certainty that I would ultimately comply, I made my final decision. The preemptive measures I had taken weren't just justified, they were necessary. "I understand," I said simply. My parents visibly relaxed, interpreting my calm response as acceptance. Ryan smirked again, already mentally spending money he would never receive. "We knew you'd understand," my mother said, reaching for my hand again. "Family always comes together in crisis. If only they knew what tomorrow would bring." Monday morning dawned bright and clear, a beautiful New England autumn day that belied the storm about to break within my family. I awoke early, reviewing my preparations one final time before heading to Sullivan's office for the official will reading. The conference room was arranged formally, with Sullivan at the head of a polished mahogany table. My parents arrived precisely on time, dressed as if for a business meeting rather than a family gathering. My mother wore a conservative black dress that seemed selected to convey appropriate grief, while my father's dark suit and subdued tie projected serious authority. Ryan appeared minutes later, uncharacteristically punctual, and wearing what appeared to be a newly purchased suit, complete with an expensive watch glinting on his wrist. "Good morning," Sullivan began formally. "We're here to address the last will and testament of Harold James Thompson. Before we begin, I want to clarify that I represent the estate exclusively, not any individual beneficiary." This standard legal disclaimer seemed to make my father uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat, exchanging a quick glance with my mother. "Is that really necessary, Jim?" he asked. "We're family here." Sullivan maintained his professional demeanor. "Standard procedure, Robert. Now, shall we proceed?" The initial portions of the will reading were straightforward. Sullivan detailed smaller bequests to longtime employees, charitable organizations, and distant relatives. My mother received her father's personal effects and family heirlooms, along with a modest cash bequest of $100,000. My father and Ryan each received similar cash amounts. Then came the crucial moment. Regarding the residual estate, Sullivan continued, which comprises business interests, investment accounts, real estate holdings, and liquid assets, totaling approximately $15.7 million. Ryan leaned forward eagerly, while my parents maintained careful, neutral expressions. "Harold established specific provisions for distribution," Sullivan stated, then paused, looking directly at me. "Leo, would you like to address this portion?" My parents' expressions shifted from neutral to confused, then alarmed as I nodded and stood. "What's happening?" my mother asked sharply. "Why would Leo address anything?" I retrieved a folder from my briefcase and placed it on the table. "Because Grandpa Harold established an irrevocable trust several months ago, naming me as trustee. All major assets were transferred into this trust before his death, with specific distribution instructions that cannot be altered." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. My father was the first to recover, his face flushing with anger. "That's impossible. We would have known about any trust arrangement." Sullivan shook his head. "The trust was established confidentially, as was Mr. Thompson's right. The documentation is completely in order, properly executed, and legally binding." Ryan slammed his hand on the table. "This is bullshit. You can't just hide assets like that." "No laws were broken," Sullivan stated firmly. "Mr. Thompson was of sound mind and body when he established the trust. He simply took steps to ensure his wishes would be honored exactly as he intended." My mother turned to me, her expression a mixture of shock and betrayal. "You knew about this? You kept this secret from your family?" "I found out after his death," I replied truthfully. when he left instructions with Sullivan to inform me. My father's legal mind was already working through implications. Fine, so there's a trust. But as beneficiaries, we still have rights to contest distributions if they don't reflect the deceased's true intentions. Sullivan cleared his throat uncomfortably. Actually, the trust includes a no-contest provision. Any beneficiary who challenges the trust provisions is automatically disinherited from receiving any distribution. Ryan's face went pale. What exactly does the trust say about distributions? I opened the folder and removed the key document. The business continues under the management structure Grandpa established, with profits distributed according to the shareholder agreement he created. His personal assets, approximately $4. $7 million remain in trust for specific purposes: funding college scholarships for employees' children, supporting the community foundations he valued, and providing for my continued education and professional development as I assume responsibility for his financial legacy. And Ryan? My mother asked, her voice barely audible. What does he get? I met her gaze directly. Ryan receives his $100,000 bequest, plus an additional $25,000 annually for 5 years, contingent upon maintaining full-time employment and completing a financial management course each year. Ryan exploded from his chair. $25,000? Are you fucking kidding me? That won't even cover interest on what I owe. My father placed a restraining hand on Ryan's arm. There must be some flexibility here, some way to address Ryan's immediate needs. The trust is irrevocable, Sullivan stated. Its terms cannot be changed, even by the trustee. My mother's expression hardened as she turned to me. You did this. You turned your grandfather against us. I shook my head. I didn't know about the trust until after he passed. This was his decision, based on his observations and concerns. What concerns? My father demanded. What possible reason would he have to structure things this way? This was the moment I had prepared for. I placed my phone on the table and played a recording and audio file from my grandfather, created 6 months before his death. I've watched with growing concern. His familiar voice filled the room, as my grandson Ryan has struggled with gambling addiction and financial irresponsibility. Despite multiple attempts to help him address these issues, the pattern continues. I've also observed my daughter and son-in-law enabling these behaviors rather than encouraging genuine change. I cannot in good conscience leave substantial assets directly to Ryan, knowing they would likely feed his addiction rather than support his recovery. Nor can I place the burden of these decisions on Leo, who would face tremendous family pressure to divert his inheritance to cover his brother's debts. This trust structure represents my best effort to protect both grandsons, one from external pressure, one from his own destructive patterns. As the recording ended, my mother was openly crying, while my father sat stone-faced. Ryan had collapsed back into his chair, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. You recorded him? My father accused. Manipulated a dying man? Sullivan intervened. Harold recorded this statement in my presence, of his own volition, after extensive discussion of his options. No one manipulated or influenced his decisions. This isn't fair, my mother insisted through tears. Ryan needs help now. Real help. Not some trust that doles out pennies while he faces dangerous creditors. I had anticipated this argument. The trust includes provisions for addiction treatment, I explained. Full coverage for a reputable residential program, plus ongoing therapy and support services. Grandpa wanted Ryan to get real help, not just financial bailouts. Ryan laughed bitterly. Rehab? That's your solution? What about the guys who are expecting payment this week? You think they care about my recovery journey? Those are consequences of your choices, I replied evenly. Grandpa wasn't responsible for them. Neither am I. My father stood abruptly. This meeting is over. We'll be consulting our own attorney about challenging this arrangement. Sullivan cleared his throat. Before you pursue that course, you should understand that challenging the trust activates the no-contest provision. You would forfeit even the direct bequests Harold left you. My mother grabbed my arm as I gathered my documents. "Leo, please. This is your brother, your family. You can't just abandon us." The guilt trip was exactly as Dr. Lewis had predicted. I gently removed her hand. "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm honoring Grandpa's wishes and protecting his legacy. The help Ryan actually needs is available through the trust. If he wants to rebuild, the foundation is there." As we left Sullivan's office, my father's parting words were both a threat and a revelation. "You've chosen money over family. Don't expect to be welcome in our home again." What he didn't understand was that the choice had never been about money. It was about honesty, responsibility, and respect for a man who had built something valuable through discipline and integrity. My grandfather had trusted me to protect those values. No amount of family manipulation would make me betray that trust. The aftermath of the will reading was predictably chaotic. My parents immediately contacted their personal attorney about challenging the trust, only to be advised against it once the no contest provision was verified. Ryan disappeared for several days, presumably avoiding creditors, while seeking alternative solutions to his financial crisis. I returned to my normal work routine, though nothing felt entirely normal. The firm boundary I had established with my family created both relief and a strange emptiness. I found myself remembering childhood moments when we had functioned as a healthy family unit before Ryan's issues, and my parents' enabling behaviors had corrupted our relationships. 6 days after the will reading, my mother appeared unannounced at my office. Her normally perfect appearance was disheveled, her eyes red from crying or lack of sleep, perhaps both. "We need to talk," she said as my assistant showed her in. "Things have gotten worse." I gestured for her to sit. "I'm listening." "Ryan's missing," she stated flatly. "He hasn't been home in 3 days. His phone goes straight to voicemail. We think he's in real trouble." Despite everything, concern for my brother surfaced immediately. "Have you filed a police report?" She shook her head. "Your father thinks that might make things worse. Some of these creditors, they're not people who appreciate police involvement." The implication was clear. Ryan was hiding from dangerous people. While I felt genuine worry for his safety, I also recognized the familiar pattern: crisis followed by rescue, enabling the cycle to continue indefinitely. "What are you asking me to do?" I questioned directly. "We need access to some of the trust money," she said, confirming my suspicion. "Just enough to clear the most dangerous debts. Then Ryan can deal with the rest through normal channels." I sighed. "Mom, you know that's not possible. Even if I wanted to, the trust doesn't allow distributions for paying gambling debts." "Then lie," she hissed, desperation overriding her usual composure. "Call it something else. No one will know." "I would know," I replied calmly, "and it would be fraud." She collapsed back in the chair, the fight temporarily leaving her. "Then he might be killed. Is that what you want? Your brother's blood on your hands because you wouldn't bend some stupid rules?" This emotional manipulation might have worked in the past, but my sessions with Dr. Lewis had prepared me for exactly this scenario. "The trust provides for addiction treatment," I reminded her. "Full coverage at any reputable facility, plus aftercare and support services. If Ryan is ready to address the root problem, help is available immediately." "That doesn't solve the immediate danger," she snapped. I leaned forward. "Mom, I care about Ryan's safety, but paying his debts hasn't helped him in the past. It's only enabled him to accumulate more. There has to be another solution." We sat in tense silence before I offered an alternative. "I know people who can help locate Ryan, get him somewhere safe, and negotiate with creditors for time while he enters treatment. Not using trust funds, but professional intervention services." Her expression showed conflict between desperation for help and disappointment that it wasn't the financial bailout she wanted. "Your father won't agree to anything that involves admitting Ryan has a problem," she said finally. "He still believes this is just a rough patch, not an addiction." This was the core issue that my grandfather had identified. My parents weren't just enabling Ryan, they were denying the fundamental nature of his problems. Then, I can't help, I said gently, but firmly. Addressing a problem requires acknowledging it first. She left without further argument, but the confrontation precipitated what came next. That evening, Ryan appeared at my apartment door, clearly intoxicated and desperate. "Bro," he slurred, pushing past me into the living room. "We need to talk." His appearance was alarming: disheveled clothes, several days of stubble, and a visible bruise on his cheekbone. Despite our conflict, seeing him in this state sparked genuine concern. "What happened to your face?" I asked, guiding him to the couch. "Just a misunderstanding," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Look, I know you think I'm some kind of loser who doesn't deserve help. That's not true," I countered. "I think you deserve real help, not enablement." He laughed bitterly. "Real help, right. Like some rehab where they make you talk about your feelings, while the guys I owe put mom and dad in the hospital." The threat was now explicit, confirming the severity of his situation. "How much do you actually owe, Ryan?" "The full amount, to everyone." He hesitated before responding. "About 600,000 total. But there's maybe 150 to guys who don't take excuses. The rest are casinos, credit cards, banks. They'll wreck my credit, but they won't break my legs." The amount was significantly higher than even the investigation had uncovered, suggesting he had continued accumulating debt even after Grandpa's death. "When did it start?" I asked. "The gambling." His defenses seemed to crumble with the direct question. "College, I guess. Small stuff at first. Poker games, sports bets. It was fun, you know? Something I was good at. And then I had a big win sophomore year. 20 grand on a basketball parlay. Felt like a genius." His eyes took on a distant look. "After that, the small bets didn't do anything for me. Needed bigger action to feel that rush again. For perhaps the first time, I was hearing honesty rather than manipulation from my brother. The admission created an opening that might not come again. "The trust will cover treatment," I said carefully. "Full residential program at any reputable facility, plus ongoing support afterward. You could get real help, Ryan." He shook his head vehemently. "That doesn't solve my problem now. These guys want their money this week. Treatment takes months. There are intervention specialists who can help negotiate with creditors while you're in treatment," I explained. "People who understand addiction and the creditor mentality. They can buy time." "And who pays for that?" he demanded. "I will," I answered. "Not from the trust, from my personal funds." This caught him by surprise. "Why would you do that after everything?" "Because you're my brother," I said simply. "And because getting you real help is what Grandpa actually wanted. Not just paying off debts so you could accumulate more." Ryan's expression cycled through confusion, suspicion, and finally a glimpse of something I hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. "What if I can't stop?" he whispered, the question seeming to surprise even him. "What if I'm too far gone?" This moment of genuine fear rather than manipulation felt like the first truthful exchange we'd had in years. "You won't know unless you try," I replied. "But Grandpa believed you could. That's why he structured help this way. He wanted recovery, not just financial rescue." Ryan stayed on my couch that night, too intoxicated to safely leave. In the morning, surprisingly sober and subdued, he agreed to meet with an intervention specialist. The meeting revealed the full extent of his addiction and the dangerous situation he had created. The specialist, Michael Carrington, had extensive experience with gambling addiction and the often dangerous creditors involved. He outlined a comprehensive approach: immediate entry into residential treatment, professional negotiation with creditors, and a structured financial recovery plan following treatment. Most creditors, even the dangerous ones, prefer guaranteed partial payment to uncertain full payment, Carrington explained. If we show them a structured plan backed by the trust's commitment to fund recovery rather than debt, many will agree to terms. To my surprise, Ryan agreed to the intervention plan. Perhaps hitting this rock bottom, seeing the trust beyond his reach, and facing truly dangerous consequences had created the motivation previous crises hadn't. My parents' reaction was mixed. My father initially refused to participate, clinging to the belief that Ryan just needed financial breathing room rather than addiction treatment. My mother, however, gradually accepted the reality of the situation, particularly after attending an educational session about gambling addiction. The day Ryan entered treatment marked a turning point. As the family gathered outside the facility, a respected center in Vermont, my father finally broke his silence. "I still think there could have been another way," he said stiffly. "But since this is happening, I hope it helps." It wasn't full acknowledgement, but it was movement in the right direction. After Ryan was checked in, my parents and I had our first civil conversation in weeks, sitting at a nearby coffee shop. "The house is being listed next month," my father admitted. "We overextended trying to cover Ryan's situations over the years." My mother added quietly, "We really believed we were helping him, that each time would be the last time he needed rescue." The admission wasn't quite an apology, but it reflected a new willingness to face reality. As they prepared to leave, my father asked an unexpected question. "The trust, how did Harold know? About the gambling, the debts, everything?" he observed. I answered simply, "He paid attention to patterns rather than explanations, and he loved Ryan enough to stop enabling behaviors that were destroying him." That conversation began a slow, tentative rebuilding process. Not instant reconciliation, but small steps toward honesty and accountability. The family dynamics that had been corroded by enabling and manipulation couldn't be repaired overnight, but addressing the underlying issues created possibility where none had existed before. Ryan's journey through treatment revealed the severity of his addiction and the psychological factors driving it. His therapists identified long-standing issues with self-worth and comparison, particularly comparison to my academic and career success. These insights didn't excuse his behavior, but helped explain the patterns that had dominated our family for years. 6 months after the trust revelation, our family situation had transformed. Ryan remained in recovery, taking his sobriety seriously one day at a time. My parents had downsized to a smaller home, accepting the financial consequences of their enabling behaviors. Our relationships remained works in progress, but with new boundaries and expectations based on honesty rather than manipulation. The trust functioned exactly as my grandfather had intended. It funded Ryan's recovery while protecting assets from enabling behaviors. It supported the business succession plan, preserving jobs and relationships my grandfather had valued, and it created a foundation for potential healing rather than continued destruction. In my grandfather's final letter to me, opened after all these events unfolded, he had written, "True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to face difficult truths and act accordingly. I trust you with my legacy, not because you understand money, but because you understand this principle." Looking back at the family meeting where my parents had so casually announced their plans for my inheritance, I realized my grandfather's wisdom extended beyond financial matters. By establishing proper boundaries and refusing to enable destructive patterns, I hadn't just protected financial assets. I had created space for genuine recovery and potential reconciliation, something no amount of money could have purchased. The 2 years following Ryan's entry into treatment brought changes none of us could have predicted. Ryan completed the 90-day residential program and committed fully to ongoing recovery work, attending meetings daily and working closely with his sponsor. The transformation wasn't immediate or without setbacks, but his dedication remained consistent. During his 4th month of sobriety, Ryan made formal amends to me as part of his recovery process. We met at a quiet park near his halfway house, sitting on a bench overlooking a small pond. "I need to apologize," he began, his voice stronger and clearer than I had heard it in years. "Not just for expecting you to bail me out, but for the resentment I carried for so long." He explained how he had compared himself to me since childhood, always feeling inadequate against my academic achievements and financial discipline. Rather than recognizing our different strengths, he had channeled his insecurity into resentment, then used gambling as an escape from these feelings. I convinced myself I was entitled to help because you had it easier, he admitted. But that wasn't true. You worked for everything you achieved. I was looking for shortcuts. The honesty of his amends created an opening for a new kind of relationship, not based on enabling or rescuing, but on mutual respect and appropriate boundaries. As Ryan progressed in recovery, the trust provisions my grandfather had established proved remarkably prescient. The annual distributions contingent on maintained sobriety and financial education provided structure without enabling. Each year, Ryan remained in recovery. He gained not just financial support, but also the skills to manage it responsibly. By the 18-month mark, Ryan had secured steady employment at a marketing firm where his creativity could flourish in a structured environment. He lived modestly in a small apartment, paying down his remaining debts according to the settlement plans Carrington had negotiated. Most importantly, he had built a life centered around recovery rather than escape. My parents' journey proved more complicated. The sale of their home and downsizing to a condominium forced a financial reckoning they had avoided for decades. My father initially maintained that they had been right to support Ryan as they had, but over time, his perspective evolved. The turning point came during a family therapy session in Ryan's 9th month of recovery. When the therapist asked what had helped Ryan most in maintaining sobriety, his answer surprised everyone. Consequences, Ryan stated firmly. Actually facing the results of my actions instead of being rescued from them. My father's expression shifted as the implication of those words sank in. Their decades of financial help hadn't supported Ryan's growth, but had instead prolonged and deepened his addiction. This realization led to my father's first genuine apology. We thought we were protecting you, he acknowledged. Instead, we were protecting ourselves from the pain of watching you struggle. I'm sorry, son. This breakthrough began my parents' own recovery from enabling behaviors. They attended support groups for families of addicts, learning healthy boundaries and supportive practices that didn't involve financial rescues. My mother particularly embraced this work, eventually becoming a volunteer helping other parents navigate similar situations. My own journey involved establishing a healthier relationship with my grandfather's legacy. Rather than viewing the inheritance as simply financial assets to manage, I recognized it as a responsibility to continue his values of discipline, integrity, and genuine support. In honor of this perspective, I established the Harold Thompson Foundation, using a portion of the trust assets to fund addiction treatment scholarships and financial literacy programs in communities with limited resources. The foundation partnered with the company's existing community initiatives, creating educational opportunities for employees' families and neighborhood youth. The business itself thrived under the leadership team my grandfather had selected. I served as an active board member, bringing financial expertise while respecting the operational knowledge of those who had worked alongside my grandfather for decades. The company expanded thoughtfully, maintaining the culture of quality and integrity that had been my grandfather's hallmark. Ryan eventually joined one of the foundation's financial literacy initiatives as a volunteer speaker, sharing his experience with gambling addiction and financial recovery. His honesty about his journey resonated particularly with young people who faced similar temptations. This work gave his recovery additional meaning and purpose. By the second anniversary of the trust revelation, our family gatherings had transformed from exercises in manipulation to genuine connections based on honesty and appropriate boundaries. We didn't pretend the past hadn't happened, but we had found ways to build something new from those difficult lessons. During a quiet moment, at one such gathering, a simple dinner at my apartment, Ryan asked a question that crystallized the journey we had taken. Do you think Grandpa knew it would work out this way? I considered the question carefully before responding. I don't think he knew exactly how things would unfold, but I think he understood something fundamental, that real help sometimes means allowing people to face consequences, and that money can't solve problems that aren't actually financial. Ryan nodded thoughtfully. The money would have disappeared in weeks if they had used your inheritance like they planned. I'd probably be dead or in prison by now. The starkness of this truth hung between us a recognition of how close we had come to a much darker outcome. Sometimes the kindest thing isn't what feels good in the moment, I reflected. Sometimes it's having the courage to maintain boundaries even when it hurts. This lesson extended beyond our family situation. In my financial advisory practice, I began having deeper conversations with clients about the purpose of wealth and the potential dangers of financial enabling. Some clients were receptive, recognizing patterns in their own families. Others resisted, preferring to believe that money could solve all problems. Either way, the conversations added dimension to financial planning that transcended mere numbers. 3 years after my grandfather's passing, I visited his grave alone on a crisp autumn day. The maple trees surrounding the cemetery blazed with color, leaves drifting gently to the ground in the light breeze. "You were right," I said quietly, placing stones on his headstone in the Jewish tradition he had always respected. About protection meaning more than just financial security. About the difference between rescuing and actually helping. As I stood there, I remembered our Saturday morning lessons, not just about investments and compound interest, but about integrity and the courage to make difficult choices. The true inheritance wasn't the money or even the business, but these principles that had guided me through the family crisis and continued to shape my decisions. The path forward wasn't perfect or without challenges. Ryan's recovery remained a day-by-day commitment. My parents continued working to redefine their relationships with both their sons. The family wounds created over decades couldn't be completely healed in just a few years. But we had broken the cycle of enabling and denial that had threatened to destroy not just financial resources but human potential. We had created space for genuine growth and recovery rather than continued destruction. And we had honored my grandfather's legacy in the truest sense, not just by protecting financial assets, but by embodying the values and integrity that had created those assets in the first place. As I walked away from the cemetery that day, I thought about the family meeting where my parents had so casually announced their plans for my inheritance. The contrast between that moment of entitled expectation and our current reality of earned respect and appropriate boundaries reflected a transformation more valuable than any financial inheritance could have been. The lesson wasn't just about money or family dynamics, but about a fundamental truth. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes help means allowing consequences. And sometimes protection means having the courage to say no, even to those you care about most. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that hurt in the short term but proved right in the long run? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family dynamics, financial boundaries, and the courage to make difficult choices. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's often the most loving thing you can do. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to face difficult truths and act accordingly.